At 16, I was standing on the curb with nothing but a duffel bag and a half-dead phone, watching my parents slam the door behind me. They told me I was grown enough to fend for myself after I confronted them about the money they'd been draining from my savings account. I bounced between couches, worked double shifts at a diner, and clawed my way through every barrier they swore would break me. For years, I carried the sting of betrayal. The people who should have protected me left me to rot. But I never forgot. And I never forgave. 10 years later, I signed the papers on a foreclosure that used to be their home. Now, they pay rent to me. Every time they slip that envelope through my office door, I feel the weight of justice, slow, cold, and undeniable, settle exactly where it belongs. My name is Daniel Ruiz. I'm 26 years old now, but this story really started a decade ago when I was just 16. Back then, I was a lanky kid with more acne than confidence, working after school at a grocery store in my small Ohio town. My parents, Carmen and Victor, liked to tell everyone they were tough but fair, the kind of old-school parents who believed in discipline. The truth was uglier. They were careless with money, manipulative with people, and when things went wrong, they always needed someone else to carry the blame. The breaking point came on a Wednesday night in February. I still remember the smell of the heater burning dust in our old beige split-level house, the hiss of the vent, the flicker of the TV in the living room. I'd just gotten home from my shift bagging groceries and was doing homework at the kitchen table when I found the envelope. It was from my credit union, addressed to me. My name. My account. I tore it open expecting a routine statement, only to find overdraft notices and withdrawals I hadn't made. The dates lined up with times I'd been at work or at school. I confronted my parents right then, holding the papers out with shaking hands. "You took my money," I said. I didn't shout, I didn't need to. The numbers were right there in black and white, hundreds gone, siphoned out over months. My father's eyes didn't flicker. He leaned back in his recliner, beer balanced on his gut, and said flatly, "You live in our house. You eat our food. That money isn't yours, it's ours." My mother didn't even look ashamed. She crossed her arms and told me I was ungrateful, that no real man hoarded money while his family struggled with bills. They said I should be proud to contribute. Something inside me snapped. I told them they had no right, that I'd earned every dime bagging groceries while they sat around blaming the world for their problems. That was the last straw. My father's face went red. He stood, towering over me, and jabbed a finger in my chest. "If you don't like how things are run in this house," he said, "then get the hell out. You're grown enough to fend for yourself." I thought he was bluffing. I thought maybe after some yelling, they'd cool off. But within minutes, my mother was dragging out a duffel bag from the hall closet. They tossed in some of my clothes, not even bothering to fold them. My father shoved the bag into my arms and opened the front door. It was freezing outside. A thin crust of snow crunched under my sneakers as he pushed me onto the porch. I begged them to stop, told them I had nowhere to go. My mother's only reply was to shove my phone charger through the cracked door and slam it shut. The lock clicked. The porch light turned off, and just like that, at 16 years old, I was homeless. I stood on the curb for hours, clutching my duffel, the February air slicing through my hoodie. My phone was at 12% battery. I had $48 left in my wallet. That was the sum total of my safety net. Every window of the house glowed warm, shadows moving behind curtains, the life I had known carrying on without me. I finally dialed my best friend, Jason. His mom let me crash on their couch that night, though I could tell from her tight smile she wasn't happy about it. That would become a theme, me being tolerated, never wanted. I cycled between Jason's, another friend's basement, and sometimes even the public library just to stay warm during the day. Everywhere I went, I carried that image burned into me, my parents, not only locking me out but doing it without hesitation, like tossing out the trash. That was the night I learned blood didn't guarantee loyalty. Family didn't mean safety. But I also learned something else. Standing there on the curb, breath fogging in the dark, I made a silent vow. They wanted me gone, erased, forgotten. I would prove them wrong. I didn't know how yet, but I would survive. I would build something. And one day, they would have to face me, not as their discarded kid, but as someone they could never dismiss again. Jason's couch lasted 3 nights. His mom, Denise, handed me a folded sheet on the 4th morning, house rules printed in 12-point Times New Roman. No guests past 9 p.m., no showers longer than 10 minutes, $40 a week contribution for utilities. I nodded like I could afford it and packed before dinner. I learned fast that hospitality had an invoice, even if the number wasn't written yet. I started carrying everything important in a gallon Ziploc: Social Security card, school ID, a creased birth certificate that smelled faintly of attic dust, and a pocket notebook. I wrote every expense in that notebook with a pencil stub: bus fare, $1.50, vending machine crackers, $1.10, laundry, $2.25. It felt like proof that I was real when everything else insisted I was temporary. Nights became a rotation, the sagging sectional at Jason's if Denise's mood was decent, a mildewed basement futon at Omar's where the dehumidifier hummed like a beehive, a battered recliner in Miguel's garage, wrapped in a moving blanket that smelled of motor oil and mouse pellets. When none of that worked, there was the 24-hour laundromat on Westfield. If you fed the dryer 2 quarters and propped yourself on the orange plastic chair, you could pass for a kid waiting on a load. School turned into a performance: show up at 7:40 a.m., splash water on my face in the bathroom, hold still in homeroom so no one saw the same hoodie 3 days running. Mr. Duval, my math teacher, slid a granola bar onto my desk one morning without looking at me. I ate it in the hall like a thief. I took any hours the grocery store would give. The schedule printout was a clutch of tiny numbers and initials. The assistant manager, Kelly, penciled me in for a Sunday 6 a.m. truck unload. "You're scrappy," she said, which I understood to mean cheap. I learned to cut open pallet wrap with the box cutter's last millimeter of blade so I didn't get written up for tool waste. My hands cracked from the freezer aisle. I stole single-use hand warmers from a torn carton and jammed them in my gloves, then felt guilty and logged the UPC in my notebook as a debt to repay someday. February bled into March. I discovered the Methodist Church served spaghetti on Tuesdays. You lined up at 5:15, pretended not to notice who else was there, kept your head down while Pastor Rick prayed. Afterward, I wrapped the leftover roll in a napkin and ate it walking back to Omar's, the butter cooling to a film on my tongue. When Denise started hinting harder about the $40, I shifted to the shelter downtown. House of Mercy was a misnomer. It was cots in rows under fluorescent lights, air heavy with bleach and cough syrup. You checked in at 8 p.m., with a plastic tote of your belongings. Anything you didn't keep on you could evaporate. On my first night, a volunteer named Lena pointed to a metal locker. "If you can't lock it, you can't keep it." I slept with the ziplock under my shirt. The shelter required proof you were actively improving your situation. That meant job applications or school attendance slips. I brought both. The receptionist, nearsighted and bored, stamped my papers with a rubber thud. The stamp mattered. It meant I existed to a system that would ignore me by default. I started collecting stamps like merit badges, attendance, work hours, counselor sign-off. Paper, paper, paper. Later, when I needed to prove timelines, those stamps would be gold. A different kind of cold set in during those nights: quiet, interior. I stopped trying to call my parents after day 3. The last message from my mother said, "Come back when you're ready to apologize." I reread it several times, dissecting it like a lab frog. There was no version of the story where she said she was sorry. I screenshotted the text on the library computer and printed it for 50 cents. I kept it behind my birth certificate, a talisman of what not to believe. The library became my daytime shelter. It opened at 9 a.m., and I claimed a corner computer, screen smudged with fingerprints and the letter N sticking. I filled out online applications: diner busser, movie theater usher, warehouse picker. I listed the grocery store as my reference and hoped Kelly would answer the phone. When the library staff shut things down at 5 p.m., I learned to linger by the stacks until the last minute, inhaling the stale, papery warmth. I got sick once, a wet cough that rattled my ribs. At the clinic, the nurse practitioner didn't ask about parents. She listened and said, "Drink water, rest, finish this Z-Pack." I nodded because saying "where?" would make something in me crack open. I slept sitting up in the shelter, chin on my chest, alarm set for 6 a.m. so I could shower before the line. The water ran lukewarm for 2 minutes and then went cold. I counted to 90 under it anyway. Sometime in late March, Kelly called me into the back office at the store. A corkboard held photos of employee potlucks from before I started, paper plates, red punch, everyone pretending retail was a family. "I can give you more hours," she said, tapping her pen. "And there's a diner on Grove that asked if we knew anyone reliable. Night shifts. Tips." She wrote a name on a sticky note: Lila, manager, Midnight Diner. "Tell her I sent you." The Midnight sat next to a tire shop and a shuttered payday lender. It smelled like coffee so burnt it looped back into sweet. Lila wore her hair in a tight bun and a silver thumb ring that clicked against the register. She asked if I could start bussing tables that night. When I said yes, she slid a stack of forms across the counter: W-4, I-9, direct deposit. I filled them out with care. Paper. Always paper. The first night at the diner was a blur of plates and apologies. The dish pit steamed my face. Keep the cups bright, the dishwasher, Manny, told me, or the truckers complain. At 3:10 a.m., when the rush thinned, Lila handed me staff meal, 2 eggs, hash browns, and a short stack. I ate slowly, syrup pooling in the ridges like amber. It was the first time in weeks I felt full. With 2 jobs, I built a rhythm that felt almost like control. Grocery store from 3:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., bus to the diner by 10:15, off at 4 a.m., nap in the shelter or on Omar's floor, school at 7:40. I taped my schedule into my notebook and crosshatched each completed shift. The act of marking an X through a day kept me upright. The bitterness didn't fade, it sharpened. I started calculating the money my parents had taken. I requested my statements at the credit union in person because online access required an address to verify. The teller printed 6 months of transactions on thin paper that curled at the edges. There it was, ATM withdrawals near our house at 11:22 p.m., 1:03 a.m., amounts just below the fee threshold, $60, $80. My signature wasn't on any of it. I slid the stack into the Ziploc and added a label in Sharpie, evidence, savings drain. On a rainy Friday in April, Pastor Rick pressed a folded bill into my palm after spaghetti night. Seed money, he said, for whatever you're planting. It was a 20, I used it to buy a prepaid phone plan and a second Ziploc. Not for fear, for order. If life was going to treat me like a variable, I would become my own constant. That spring, I learned a final hard lesson. Help was real, but it wasn't free. Every couch hosted a conversation where someone explained their limits. Every favor had an aftertaste. It didn't make the help bad, it just made it human. So I stopped waiting for rescue and started building rituals: count cash twice, log every tip, photograph the whiteboard schedule each Sunday with my cracked phone so no one could claim I'd missed a shift. The rituals were a railing on a staircase I could barely see. By May, the nights were warmer. I started falling asleep to the electrical buzz of the shelter lights without noticing. The anger cooled from a flare to a coal, dense and hot, living low in my stomach. I fed it small things: another X in the notebook, another stamped paper, another shift done. I didn't have a plan yet. But a structure was forming, plank by stubborn plank, and I could feel the floor becoming solid under my feet. The diner became my pivot point, the first place I felt the grind turning into something resembling progress. It wasn't glamorous. Most nights were fluorescent lights humming over chipped formica, the smell of fryer oil clinging to my hoodie, and truckers who left quarters stuck to the counter with maple syrup. But tips, even small ones, piled up faster than the grocery store paycheck alone ever could. By the end of the first month, I had a system. Tips went straight into an envelope labeled cash only, not to touch. Wages from the diner went into a new checking account, separate from the one my parents had gutted. I kept the debit card hidden inside my math textbook. At the grocery store, I still clocked in and bagged groceries like nothing had changed, but every dollar from both jobs went into building a buffer. The shelter started feeling less like a sentence and more like a stepping stone. I kept the rules, collected my attendance stamps, and avoided conflicts. A staff member named Harold noticed. He was an older guy, bald with wire-rimmed glasses, and he ran the intake desk like a librarian cataloging lives. One night, while I was filing my school attendance slip, he looked at me and said, "You're not going to be here long." He was right. Within 3 months of double shifts, I scraped together $1,200, enough to rent a tiny studio above a laundromat on Ridge Street. It was barely 220 square feet, a single window painted shut, a heater that groaned like an old man, and a bathroom so small I had to sit sideways on the toilet. But it was mine. My name on the lease. My own key on the ring. I'll never forget that first night. I didn't even have a mattress yet, just a sleeping bag on the hardwood. I lay there listening to the thrum of dryers downstairs and felt something I hadn't since childhood: safety. No one could kick me out. No one could decide, on a whim, that I no longer belonged. The locks answered to me. The diner shifts kept me afloat, but school was slipping. I missed first period too often after working until 4 a.m. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Avery, cornered me one afternoon. "Daniel, you're sharp. But you're running yourself into the ground." She offered me a lifeline: switch into an alternative program that allowed evening classes. That way, I could keep working nights. I took it. It meant I'd graduate later than my peers, but at least I'd graduate. And more importantly, it freed up mornings for sleep. The exhaustion dulled, and my brain started functioning again. Around this time, Lila at the diner pulled me aside. She'd noticed my work ethic and asked if I wanted to learn server duties. "More money if you can handle the floor," she said, sliding a laminated menu across the counter. I practiced the script: specials, upsells, side options. My first week waiting tables, I doubled my income. A Good Friday night meant walking out with $120 in tips. I started tracking everything in my notebook with obsessive precision: income by source, expenses down to the penny, savings totals at the end of each week. The pages looked like ledgers, neat columns of numbers and notes. Looking back, that's when the idea of control clicked. Money wasn't just survival, it was leverage. It was the difference between begging for a couch and signing a lease. Meanwhile, my parents didn't call. Not once. I'd half expected at least a token check-in, a crumb of guilt. But silence stretched. The only trace of them was the stack of bank statements I still kept in the evidence Ziploc. Sometimes I'd spread them out on the floor of my studio, staring at the withdrawals, feeling the coal in my stomach glow hotter. I wasn't ready for revenge yet, but the seed had been planted. One unexpected break came from Miguel, the friend whose garage recliner had been my bed more than once. His uncle worked maintenance for a property manager and needed help painting apartments. It paid cash under the table. Saturdays, I traded my server uniform for paint-stained coveralls and spent hours rolling beige on beige, the scent of primer sinking into my skin. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught me something. Buildings were machines, and if you learned the parts, plumbing, wiring, drywall, you could own the whole machine someday. By the end of my senior year, I had $3,400 in savings, a steady job at the diner, part-time painting work, and my own apartment. I wasn't rich, not even close, but compared to the boy standing on the curb in February, I was unrecognizable. I had structure. I had proof. The day I picked up my high school diploma, I walked home holding it like contraband. No parents in the bleachers. No applause. Just me, sweat drying under my dress shirt, gripping that folder as if it were a deed. I slid it into my Ziploc, labeled it evidence, graduation. That's when I made myself another vow: if survival was possible, then stability was next. And after stability? Power. I didn't know it yet, but I had already taken my first step toward the empire that would one day put my parents under my thumb. The studio above the laundromat became my war room. The hardwood floor doubled as a filing cabinet, my Ziploc stacked in a milk crate were my archives. I didn't call it revenge yet, but I knew I was building a record, something undeniable, the way investigators build cases with binders and exhibits. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into the credit union again, determined to push further. I'd saved enough that I wanted a better account, maybe one with fewer fees. The teller, a new guy named Dennis, asked for my ID, typed for a while, then frowned. You have a delinquent account." I froze. "What account?" He flipped his screen around, tilting it so I could see. There it was, a Visa credit card with my name, opened at 17 with a cosigner. Only I had never signed anything. The balance, $2,984.37. Minimum payment overdue by 60 days. My stomach turned cold. "Who signed this?" I asked. Dennis squinted. "Looks like a cosigner, Victor Ruiz." "My father. He'd used my social security number and pinned me with debt before I was legally an adult." Dennis printed the account documents for me, stapled thick. I tucked them into my notebook like evidence bags. That night in the studio, I read them line by line, my father's looping signature staring back at me. Gas stations, liquor stores, cash advances, it was all there. That discovery shifted something. Survival had been my full-time job, but now survival had a rival: documentation. I started hunting paper trails the way some people hunt bargains. I pulled my credit report for the first time at the library computer, entering my birth date with trembling fingers. The screen populated with 3 accounts I'd never opened. 2 small loans, both delinquent. Both tied to my father's address. I printed everything. 50 cents a page drained my library balance, but I didn't care. Every page went into a fresh Ziploc labeled evidence: credit fraud. The fraud hurt me in practical ways. When I tried to rent a bigger apartment, the landlord ran my credit and shook his head. Too many delinquencies. I wanted to scream. Instead, I went back to Ridge Street, locked the studio door, and added another note in my ledger: they tried to sink me. At the diner, I learned to smile through exhaustion. At the paint jobs, I learned to sand drywall until my arms ached. But back in the studio, I turned into my own private auditor. Every receipt, every pay stub, every printed report got a label, a date, a slot. If my parents wanted to bury me in debt and paperwork, I would dig myself out with paperwork. One evening, around 2 in the morning after a diner shift, I opened my notebook and started sketching timelines. Left home February 2009. Opened studio lease May 2009. First diner paycheck June 2009. Fake credit card balance climbing in parallel. I used different colored pens like crime scene investigators do in shows, red for fraud, blue for survival, black for milestones. The pattern was obvious. Every step forward I made, they tried to drag me 2 steps back. I thought about confronting them, marching up to that beige split level and slamming the papers on the table. But then I pictured their faces. The blank denial. The gaslighting. The family helps family refrain. No, confrontation would give them power. Paper was my power now. Paper couldn't lie the way people did. The diner became my cover story for collecting evidence. While regulars swapped gossip, I scribbled notes on order pads between refills, then tore out the pages and added them to my crate at home. I built a habit of backing everything up, scanned copies on a USB drive I kept hidden inside an old peanut butter jar. If the studio ever burned, my archive wouldn't. By 2011, when I turned 18, my credit was a disaster on paper, but my actual finances were steady. I had $7,800 in savings, a used Honda Civic with no payments, and 2 steady income streams. Landlords turned me down, banks gave me side eyes, but the truth was, I was winning anyway. And slowly, a new thought grew roots. If they could weaponize debt against me, I could weaponize ownership against them. Property wasn't just walls and pipes, it was leverage. And if I learned the rules of the game, I could build the same kind of trap they'd sprung on me, only smarter, airtight, inescapable. For now, the paper trails were enough. But in my studio above the laundromat, listening to the rumble of dryers and the hiss of steam pipes, I started whispering to myself like a mantra, one day, this won't just be survival. This will be power. Independence doesn't arrive all at once, it seeps in like water through cracks. Mine came in the form of small, unglamorous victories, paying rent on time every month, showing up for shifts when others called out, building savings in increments of $20 bills. Each stack of diner tips wrapped in rubber bands felt like armor. The Civic became my second apartment. I kept a blanket, change of clothes, and a gallon of water in the trunk. When the studio's heater failed for 3 nights in January, I idled the car in the parking lot, wrapped in layers, listening to the fan heater rattle through the vents. It wasn't comfortable, but it was mine, and no one could lock me out. By 19, I had graduated high school through the evening program and was working 6 days a week. My days blurred into a cycle: paint crew from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., diner from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m., sleep from 3 o'clock to 8 a.m. The notebook kept me sane. Every dollar I earned, every hour I worked, every bill I paid was logged. It turned chaos into proof that I was moving forward, not just treading water. Debt still shadowed me. The fraudulent accounts my father had opened dragged my credit score into the 500s. When I tried applying for a student loan, I got rejected outright. That rejection hurt. College had seemed like my escape hatch. But sitting in my studio that night, papers spread across the floor, I decided maybe college wasn't the only route. I pivoted. If I couldn't borrow, I'd learn for free. I checked out real estate guides from the library, Landlording for Beginners, Real Estate Investing 101, the kind of books most people skim once and forget. I read them cover to cover, scribbling notes in the margins of my notebook. The math wasn't abstract to me anymore. Rent checks, maintenance costs, leverage, all of it was survival in another language. Meanwhile, at the diner, Lila pushed me harder. "You've got hustle," she said, handing me a new schedule with longer shifts. She trusted me to close up, count the register, lock the doors. That trust translated into better sections during rushes, which translated into better tips. My first $200 night felt like a lottery win. The painting jobs expanded too. Miguel's uncle started letting me handle small repairs solo, swapping out locks, patching drywall, repainting bathrooms. I learned the names of tools, the difference between PVC and copper, how to read a water meter. Every skill went into my mental vault, knowledge my parents never thought I'd have the patience for. And then came the first milestone that felt like more than survival. I saved enough for a down payment on a used laptop. It wasn't much, plastic casing cracked, battery half dead, but it let me build spreadsheets instead of scribbles. I transferred all my notebook logs into color-coded tabs. Income tracked against expenses, goals against progress. It looked like something out of a business textbook, but it was just my life, quantified. Still, I didn't let myself forget where I came from. The crate of Ziplocs sat under my bed like a shrine: overdraft notices, fraudulent loans, the eviction by family text from my mother. Sometimes I'd pull one out and study it, like sharpening a blade. Those documents weren't just records, they were fuel. At 20, I hit another wall. The studio lease was ending, and the landlord raised the rent by $100. For most tenants, it was a shove toward eviction. For me, it was a challenge. I picked up extra shifts, cut back on food costs, and for 3 months lived mostly on eggs, rice, and whatever the diner let me eat at the end of shifts. The ledger stayed balanced. Barely. And then, quietly, without fanfare, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving their sabotage anymore. I was outpacing it. My father's stolen credit had wrecked my score, yes. But he couldn't touch the cash I stacked in my envelope system. He couldn't erase the skills I was collecting, or the habits I was building. He had taken my foundation, but I was building a new one above it, stronger, layer by layer. One night, after closing the diner, I walked the half-mile home under buzzing street lamps. I stopped at the curb outside a row of apartments where tenants' names were taped above each mailbox. Ruiz. 3 doors down, someone else with my surname. Not my family, just coincidence. Still, it felt symbolic, proof that Ruiz didn't have to mean them. It could mean me. I stood there a long time, thinking about the arc of things. They had cast me out with nothing but a duffel bag. 10 years later, I'd still be carrying their last name, but I'd make sure it was my signature on deeds, on contracts, on leases. Mine, not theirs. Independence wasn't glamorous. It was hash browns at 2:30 a.m., paint on my jeans, spreadsheets in a second-hand laptop, and savings envelopes tucked in textbooks. But it was real. And it was mine. Revenge wasn't a lightning bolt. It didn't strike me one night in a flash of anger. It grew slowly, like a weed through concrete cracks, watered by every double shift, every rejection letter, every reminder of what my parents had stolen. It started with an offhand comment at the diner. A trucker in a camo hat was griping about his landlord. "Guy hasn't fixed the boiler in 3 weeks," he muttered while I poured his coffee. "But you better believe rent's due on time." I laughed politely, but the thought stuck with me. Landlord. Someone who collected checks instead of signing them. Someone who turned property into leverage. I went home that night and pulled one of my real estate guides off the shelf. The words blurred at first, but then a sentence snapped into focus: "The person who owns the deed owns the leverage." That sentence lit a fuse. I didn't have the capital yet, but I had discipline. I doubled down on savings, literally. For every dollar I spent, I matched it in savings, no matter how small. If I dropped $5 on bus fare, I tucked another $5 into the envelope labeled seed money. It hurt, but it grew. By the end of the year, I had $11,000 tucked away, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just running from my parents' betrayal, I was running toward something. The painting jobs became more than side work. Miguel's uncle started teaching me how the business ran, how to estimate labor hours, how to bill for supplies, how to schedule contractors. "You don't get rich with your hands," he told me once, wiping drywall dust from his palms. "You get rich with contracts." That line went straight into my notebook. Meanwhile, I kept documenting. Every fraudulent account my father had opened stayed current in my records, even after I disputed them with the credit bureaus. Letters, responses, rejection slips, I saved them all. I realized one day, flipping through the pile, that I was holding a story in documents: the betrayal, the sabotage, the survival. If I ever needed to, I could show it to anyone and they'd understand exactly what had been done to me. But more importantly, those papers reminded me of my long game. My parents thought they had cut me loose, that I was just another casualty of tough love. They didn't know I was building the very thing they had mocked me for even dreaming of: stability, wealth, power. At 22, I made my first leap. A duplex on Grant Street went into foreclosure. The listing was buried in the classifieds, 2 lines of text. Asking price, $42,000. I stared at the number for hours. It felt impossible, more money than I had ever seen in one place. But with my savings, plus a small loan through a credit union program for first-time buyers, it was just within reach. I called, I toured. The place was a wreck: peeling paint, sagging porch, basement smelling of mildew. But the bones were solid. And the rent potential? Enough to cover the mortgage twice over. Signing those papers was terrifying. My hand shook as I wrote my name, Daniel Ruiz, on the dotted line. But when the keys dropped into my palm, cold and heavy, I felt something shift. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was owning. I moved into one unit, rented out the other. I fixed the plumbing with YouTube tutorials and paint with muscle memory. My tenants weren't rich, but they paid on time. Every check that came in felt like a reversal of the old equation. For years, I had been the one begging for couches, scraping for meals. Now, people wrote checks to me. The seed of revenge sprouted that year. Because I realized, if I could own one house, I could own 5. If I could own 5, I could own 20. And if I could own 20, then one day, when fate, or foreclosure, put my parents' beige split level on the chopping block, I'd be there, cash in hand. I didn't obsess over them. Not outwardly. I didn't drive past their house or stalk them on social media. But I kept the idea tucked in the back of my mind, like a marked page in a book. One day, they'll answer to me. Until then, I built. Every diner shift, every paint job, every scraped knee from crawling under a sink, it all funneled into the same goal. The seed was planted. The soil was bitter, but the roots were deep. Owning that first duplex taught me a hard truth: real estate wasn't passive. It was a full contact sport. The tenants called me at 2 a.m. when the furnace quit. The city inspector flagged peeling paint on the porch as a safety hazard. A burst pipe in the basement soaked my only pair of good shoes. But each problem I solved gave me something my parents never had: competence. Where they had stumbled, I learned to stand. I devoured every resource I could find. Library books, YouTube repair tutorials, landlord forums where veterans swapped war stories about tenants who paid in pennies or flooded kitchens trying to fix sinks themselves. I took night classes at the community college, Property Management 101, Basic Accounting. I sat in the back row, hoodie pulled low, scribbling notes like my life depended on it. In a way, it did. The diner kept me afloat while the duplex stabilized. Rent from the other unit covered the mortgage, leaving me with a slim surplus. Every spare dollar went into savings for the next purchase. My ledger, now digital in spreadsheets, tracked cash flow, repair costs, tenant histories. I built color-coded tabs: red for emergencies, green for profit, yellow for projected expenses. It wasn't just bookkeeping. It was strategy. One Saturday, Miguel's uncle handed me a stack of old maintenance logs from his properties. "You want to learn the game?" he said. "Read these." I spent nights combing through them. Each log told a story: complaints filed, work orders issued, invoices paid. Patterns emerged. Some tenants always paid late but never moved out. Some buildings drained money faster than they made it. Others, with the right repairs at the right time, turned into steady machines. It was like reading blueprints for wealth disguised as paperwork. I also learned about leverage, the kind my father had abused, but this time on my terms. Mortgages weren't chains if you used them smartly. They were levers. The duplex became collateral for a small line of credit, which I funneled into a down payment on my second property, a triplex with faded green siding and sagging gutters. This time, I didn't move in. I stayed in the duplex and filled the triplex with tenants immediately. The checks rolled in. They weren't huge, but together they covered the triplex mortgage, part of the duplex expenses, and gave me breathing room. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was compounding. Still, every step forward came with setbacks. A tenant skipped town without paying 3 months' rent. Another trashed their unit with cigarette burns and beer cans. I learned to take photos of everything before and after, time-stamped, stored in cloud folders. Evidence, always. Tenants could lie. Paper couldn't. By 24, I owned 4 properties, 4 deeds with my name printed clean and bold: Daniel Ruiz. I'd gone from the kid sleeping on recliners to the man who decided whether others had roofs over their heads. The irony didn't escape me. The diner started to feel like a relic. Lila hugged me when I turned in my apron. "You'll run this town someday," she said. I laughed it off, but part of me believed her. Because by then, the game had revealed itself. Real estate wasn't about houses. It was about leverage, paper trails, timing. And I was good at it, better than my parents ever were with their paycheck-to-paycheck chaos. They'd stolen from me, buried me in fraudulent debt, and thrown me out. But in trying to sink me, they'd accidentally given me the sharpest tool of all: obsession with proof, with strategy, with control. I kept their house, the beige split level where I'd been cast out, in the back of my mind like a bookmark. Property records were public, and sometimes I'd look it up. Taxes unpaid 2 years in a row. A second mortgage added, balance creeping higher. I could see the cracks forming from miles away. That's when the seed of revenge sprouted into a plan. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need screaming matches or apologies they'd never mean. All I needed to do was wait, watch the paper trails, and be ready when the moment came. Because one day, their house would fall. And when it did, I'd be there, not as their son, not as their victim, but as their landlord. I used to check county property records the way some people scroll Instagram. Late at night, I'd log into the auditor's website and type in addresses, curious about who owned what they owed, what was slipping through the cracks. It was half hobby, half reconnaissance. That's how I saw it. The beige split level on Willow Creek Drive. My parents' house. Listed with unpaid property taxes for 2 consecutive years. Then a lien notice. Then, like a warning shot, the foreclosure filing. My breath caught when I saw the docket. For years I had imagined this moment abstractly, a fantasy I tucked away to keep me moving through the grind. But here it was, in black and white, their fortress crumbling under paperwork, the same way they'd once weaponized paperwork against me. I didn't act immediately. Impulse was their game, not mine. I printed everything, docket entries, tax liens, the foreclosure notice. Labeled, dated, filed. Then I waited. The process would take months, sometimes a year. In that time, I made sure my finances were bulletproof. I cut expenses to the bone, banked every rent check, and built a war chest. While I prepared, I let myself remember. Standing on that porch at 16, clutching a duffel bag while the door locked behind me. My mother's text about apologizing. My father's signature on a credit card I never opened. All of it felt like fuel, burning steady, pushing me forward. The foreclosure auction date posted online, September 14, 2019. Location, County Courthouse. Minimum bid, $68,000. I barely slept the night before. I dressed in my best clothes, a pressed shirt, slacks, the shoes I reserved for closings. At the courthouse steps, a small crowd gathered, investors in polos, a few lawyers with clipboards, a couple of locals hoping for bargains. I stood among them, heart pounding, hand steady. The auctioneer read the address. Willow Creek Drive. My parents' names echoed across the steps like a verdict. I raised my hand at the opening bid. Others chimed in, but I kept calm, never hesitating. Each raise felt surgical, precise. At $83,000, the crowd thinned. At $87,000, silence. Sold, the auctioneer barked, slamming his clipboard. Just like that, it was mine. The courthouse clerk handed me a receipt, then a packet of documents. I tucked them into my leather folder and walked out into the sun. I expected to feel triumph, but what I felt instead was gravity, like the earth had tilted and everything was sliding into place. I didn't drive past the house right away. I let the paperwork settle, the deed process through. Only after everything was signed, sealed, and stamped did I allow myself to stand at the curb of Willow Creek Drive again. The beige siding looked older, paint peeling, gutters sagging. A dented Chevy sat in the driveway. Curtains drawn. I could almost see my 16-year-old self on that same curb, shivering with a duffel bag. But this time, I held the deed. I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. The eviction process was formal, deliberate, impersonal. A notice delivered by certified mail. A timeline outlined in legal terms. No yelling. No theatrics. Just paper, the same kind they'd once used to erase me. When the first rent check arrived, handwritten and shaky, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The names in the corner, Victor and Carmen Ruiz, looked surreal. The same hands that had thrown me out were now writing checks to me. I logged the payment, scanned the check, timestamped the file, and slid the original into a new Ziploc labeled evidence, rents due. The net had tightened. They didn't even know it yet. To them, I was just the new landlord, faceless, businesslike. They hadn't seen me. Not yet. But they would. And when they did, it wouldn't be as their son. It would be as the man holding their leash. The day I became their landlord, I didn't kick the door in. I didn't storm the beige split level with cameras or friends or some triumphant speech. That wasn't the point. The point was the paper. Everything was clean, documented, airtight. The deed filed with the county. The foreclosure stamped by the court. The lease agreement drafted on standard templates, signed in ink, notarized. I'd learned from their chaos, I would never leave openings for denials. I hired a property manager as my shield. On paper, she was the point of contact. She handled the walkthrough, drafted the lease, explained the rules. The tenants, Victor and Carmen Ruiz, nodded, signed, and slid the pages back without ever knowing whose signature hovered above theirs on the ownership line. The first lease term was 6 months. Standard clauses, rent due on the first, 5-day grace, late fees after that. Tenants responsible for lawn care. No subletting. No alterations without approval. Nothing extraordinary. Just the same rules they'd once flouted when I was a teenager, begging them for accountability. I stayed behind the curtain. Their rent checks came to my P.O. box. I scanned each one, time-stamped the deposit slip, and filed the originals. The property manager kept things running smoothly, but every time an email forwarded to me, tenant requests repair, stove not heating properly, I felt the coil tighten. And yet, I didn't rush the reveal. A trap doesn't spring too early. It waits until the prey has walked all the way inside. Meanwhile, I reinforced the paper walls around them. I pulled every record I could from public archives, foreclosure filings, unpaid tax liens, delinquent utility notices. I built a separate binder just for Willow Creek, tabbed by year, cross-referenced with bank deposits from their rent checks. It wasn't just a ledger. It was a prosecution file. In the binder's front pocket, I kept the old evidence, the stolen credit cards, the overdraft notices, the eviction by text from my mother. Together, the file told a story in cold, unshakable order. Parents cast out their son, siphoned his money, buried him in debt, and now, 10 years later, handed him checks to keep the roof over their heads. By month 3, they were late. The rent didn't come on the 1st. Or the 5th. On the 7th, my property manager sent the statutory notice, 5 days to pay or vacate. On the 9th, a check arrived. Short by $150. A note scrawled on the memo line, "We'll catch up next month." I stared at it, the coal in my stomach glowing hot. I scanned the check, logged the discrepancy, filed it under evidence, partial payment. Then I called my property manager and told her, no exceptions. Full rent or eviction. This wasn't cruelty. It was precision. For years, they had weaponized inconsistency against me, shifting rules, broken promises, shifting blame. Now the rules were clear, written, enforceable. Their survival depended on obeying the very order they had denied me. The following month, the payment arrived on time, in full. Lesson absorbed. I allowed myself one drive-by. A slow pass down Willow Creek Drive, windows up. The beige siding looked tired, the lawn patchy. I saw my father through the garage window, bent over a workbench, gray creeping into his hair. My mother carried groceries inside, her back hunched, moving slower than I remembered. I felt nothing like pity. Only inevitability. They still didn't know. To them, I was a distant landlord, maybe a faceless investor who'd scooped up their home in a courthouse sale. They didn't know that the boy they'd shoved onto the curb now owned the walls around them. But they would. Not yet, but soon. And when I revealed it, it wouldn't be with shouting or vengeance. It would be with paper, signed, sealed, undeniable. The same way this had all begun. Because in the end, my parents had taught me one lasting lesson, even if they never intended to, power doesn't come from noise. It comes from control. And I had it. All of it. The reveal wasn't theatrical. It was surgical. It happened on a Thursday afternoon when my property manager called. "They're pushing back," she said. "Claiming the lease terms are unfair. Asking to renegotiate." I almost laughed. My parents, people who had once told me I had no right to my own savings, were now pleading for leniency from the faceless landlord they thought was a stranger. The irony was so sharp it felt like glass in my throat. I told her I'd handle it directly. She hesitated, reminding me that keeping distance was cleaner. But I was done with clean. It was time. I scheduled a meeting under the guise of a landlord review. No mention of my name. Just a date, a time, a request to bring their lease and payment records. The living room hadn't changed much since the night they threw me out. The same beige carpet, now flattened with age. The same floral couch cushions, sagging in the middle. My father sat in his recliner, a shadow of the man who'd towered over me at 16. My mother perched on the armrest, arms crossed, defensive. They didn't recognize me at first. 10 years had carved me into someone else. Taller, broader, sharper. I set my leather folder on the coffee table and waited. "Where's the landlord?" my father asked, voice gruff. "You're looking at him," I said. The silence stretched. My mother blinked, as if her brain was buffering. My father let out a dry laugh. "Don't play games." I opened the folder. Deed copy. Auction certificate. Lease agreement with their signatures. I laid them out in a row like evidence in court. "I'm not playing," I said. "This house belongs to me. You rent it from me. Every check you've written these last 6 months went into my account." My mother's face drained of color. My father leaned forward, squinting at the papers. His finger traced his own signature on the lease, slow and unsure. This is some kind of trick." I slid another page forward, their foreclosure docket, stamped by the county. Then the rent checks, scanned copies with their handwriting. Then, from the old Ziploc, the overdraft notices and credit card documents from when I was 16. "This isn't a trick," I said, my voice steady. "This is the trail you left behind. And this," I tapped the deed, "is where it ends." My mother whispered, "Daniel." But it wasn't maternal. It was fear. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I just outlined the facts. "You stole from me. You threw me out. You left me to rot. I built myself back up, and now, without even realizing it, you put yourselves under my roof. That's not an accident. That's consequence." My father's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. For once, silence was his only defense. I gathered the papers back into the folder, deliberate and slow. The lease stands. The rent is due in full, on time, every month. If it isn't, the eviction process begins. Not because I want it, because that's the law. My mother's eyes glistened. My father looked away. Neither of them argued. I stood, folder tucked under my arm. "You don't have to like it. You just have to pay it. Same as anyone else." On my way out, I paused at the doorway. The same door they'd slammed in my face a decade earlier. The hinge still squeaked. The brass handle still had a worn patch from years of hands gripping it. For a moment, I could almost see my 16-year-old self standing outside in the cold, clutching a duffel bag. This time, though, I wasn't locked out. I was locking them in. Owning their house and enforcing the lease was enough for me personally. But privately, I knew the story couldn't end there. My parents had built their reputations on lies, tough but fair, struggling but honest. Neighbors, relatives, even their church believed it. Meanwhile, I carried the receipts, literally. Exposure wasn't about revenge alone. It was about record. Proof. Accountability. I started quietly. I organized my archive into a single binder, the Ruiz file. Overdraft notices, forged credit applications, foreclosure dockets, rent checks. Each tab labeled and timestamped. Then I wrote a summary timeline: the night I was thrown out, the years of fraud, the foreclosure, the auction. A clean, factual narrative backed by documents. The first audience was family. I sent an email to every Ruiz relative I had contacts for, uncles, cousins, even my grandmother. Subject line: "You deserve to know the truth." Inside, a PDF of the timeline and scans of key documents. No editorializing. Just facts. The fallout was immediate. My cousin emailed back within an hour, "Is this real?" Another relative called, voice trembling with shock. "They told us you ran away. They said you wanted nothing to do with them." I let the document speak. Word spread. The next Sunday, my parents showed up at church like usual, but whispers followed them down the aisle. Pastor Rick, who still remembered giving me the 20 back in the shelter days, called me privately. "Son, I saw the papers. If even half of it is true." He trailed off. "Well, people need to see who they really are." I didn't gloat. I didn't embellish. I just handed him the binder when he asked to borrow it. Paper trails don't need dramatics, they need eyes. My parents tried damage control. My mother sent me a text: "How could you humiliate us like this? Family business should stay private." I didn't respond. Privacy had ended the moment they forged my name on a credit card. The exposure grew legs beyond family. A tenant forum I frequented allowed anonymous case studies. I posted mine: "Parents sabotage minor with fraudulent debt, later rent their own foreclosed property from him." I blurred names, but the details were surgical. The post went viral in the niche landlord investor world. Commenters called it the coldest revenge arc they'd ever seen. Even Miguel's uncle brought it up one day, laughing as he waved his phone. "People think it's fiction, Daniel. They don't know you're the one who lived it." But the most brutal exposure came when my parents themselves finally faced relatives at a birthday gathering. My aunt confronted them, binder in hand, demanding answers. Witnesses told me later my father just sat there, jaw locked, while my mother stammered excuses. For once, they couldn't spin the narrative. Paper doesn't lie. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Exposure wasn't about me standing over them. It was about everyone else seeing through them, stripping away the facade they'd built for decades. Rent checks still came. Always on time now, always in full. The handwriting grew shakier, but the numbers were right. Each one was more than money, it was acknowledgement, silent and bitter, that the balance of power had flipped forever. In the end, exposure wasn't loud. It was steady. Documents passed hand to hand, whispers turned to murmurs, trust curdled into doubt. My parents weren't shouted down or dragged out, they were left to stew in a silence heavier than any confrontation could deliver. And for me, that silence was justice. The last winter of their lease was the quietest. No more partial checks, no more appeals to renegotiate. Rent arrived on the 1st by noon, every month, the envelopes chalky with cold. I logged each one the same way: scan, timestamp, deposit, receipt, until routine dulled the old sting into something like background weather. They had adapted to the rules, the way everyone eventually adapts to gravity. In late February, my property manager forwarded an email from my mother: "We plan to vacate at lease end. Please confirm move-out procedures." No emotion, just administrative language. I replied with the checklist: 60 days notice acknowledged, utilities to remain on through inspection, keys to be returned at the walkthrough, forwarding address for the deposit. Precision, not pity. The walkthrough landed on a Thursday at 10 a.m. The house smelled like pine sol and boiled coffee. My father stood by the garage door, hands in jacket pockets, eyes fixed anywhere but me. My mother hovered near the kitchen, wearing a sweater I remembered from high school, now thin to thread. I set my clipboard on the counter and began the circuit with my property manager. Photos of each room with timestamp shots on my phone, meter readings, notes on nail holes, one cracked tile, oven cleaned adequately, gutters neglected. The list was clinical because that's what the situation required. The home was no longer a story. It was a structure. We treated it like one. Halfway through, my father cleared his throat. "We'll have the last rent in a moment," he said. I nodded, checked the thermostat, logged 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I didn't fill the silence. I'd learned that silence is where truth shows up, if you give it space. In the living room, my mother handed me a bank check. It was pristine, blue watermarked paper that caught the light. The memo line said final. My hands remembered a different envelope, the one I'd clutched at 16 with overdraft notices. I slid the check into a clear sleeve. Paper. Always paper. Deposits prorated, I said, showing the deductions highlighted in yellow on the move-out statement. Gutter cleaning, a cracked tile, a deep clean for the oven they'd half finished. My property manager initialed the line items. My mother nodded once, mechanical. My father signed the acknowledgement. The pens clicked. I passed them the final receipt. It was a simple thing: today's date, the address, the amount received, my signature. My name in the landlord box. Daniel Ruiz. That was the whole arc, distilled into 4 words and a signature. The keys came next. 3 brass, 1 garage remote with black tape across a split seam. I photographed them on the counter, timestamp at the bottom right, 10:42 and 11 seconds. Chain of custody mattered to me, not because I distrusted them anymore, but because I trusted the ritual that had kept me upright all these years. My mother folded her arms. My father lingered. Then, like a thought he'd meant to bury but couldn't, he spoke. "I shouldn't have signed your name," he said, eyes on the counter. The words fell out like loose nails. "On the card. On the loans. I shouldn't have done that." I looked at him. There was no apology in the shape he made of the admission, only a concession to fact. Still, facts are valuable. I tapped my phone and started a voice memo. "Can you repeat that? For the record." He stared at me, anger and resignation wrestling behind his eyes. Then he nodded. "I used your name. I put you in debt. It was wrong." The memo saved with an auto-generated title, New Recording 1044. I backed it up to the cloud as habit, a muscle firing without thinking. Evidence doesn't need volume. It needs clarity. We finished the walkthrough. In the driveway, my mother hesitated. "We're going to my sister's for a bit," she said. "Until we figure things out." She waited, as if the statement contained a question. It didn't. "I wish you both a stable next chapter," I said. It was true. Justice and cruelty are not the same thing. I had no interest in dragging them further than the consequences required. They left in the dented Chevy, pulling away slow. The street was quiet, frost still clinging to the grass in patches like lace. I stood there with the keys cooling in my palm and felt nothing cinematic. Just the steady click of gears finding their rightful teeth. Inside, I set up the tripod in the entryway and recorded a condition video, date, time, room by room. It wasn't paranoia, it was procedure. I emailed the deposit statement, filed the voice memo in the Ruiz binder behind a tab labeled Admission, Audio, uploaded the photos to their folder, and slid the paper check into my bank bag for a 2 p.m. deposit. Systems had carried me farther than anger ever could. I didn't keep the house. Nostalgia is an expensive landlord. 2 weeks later, I listed it. A young couple with a toddler and a dachshund toured on a rainy Sunday, The kid ran figure eights around the coffee table, laughing. They made an offer at asking. I accepted. At closing, the title company clerk slid the deed across for signature, the way clerks have done a million times. My name passed briefly through the chain and out again, a clean link added where a break used to be. Afterward, I drove to the old laundromat on Ridge Street. The studio window was still painted shut. The dryers hummed the same low thrum through the floorboards. I parked and sat with the engine off, thinking about the boy who once counted quarters in that upstairs room and labeled Ziploc bags like they were armor. They were. In their way, they still are. I took the binder from the passenger seat, heavy with 10 years of paper, and paged to the last tab. Final payment, Willow Creek. I slipped the bank check receipt into its sleeve, pressed the metal rings closed, and felt the binder's weight settle. By evening, I was back at my office, a repurposed unit in the triplex, walls painted clean white, a steel file cabinet humming softly with the weight of records. I placed the Ruiz file on the bottom shelf. It didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like a completed audit. Justice, I've learned, isn't loud. It's a ledger balancing to zero, a system applied without favoritism, a key turning once and only once because you cut it right. The revenge people expect is fireworks, the kind that works is paperwork and patience. Mine had both. Before locking up, I checked the window. Outside, the streetlights blinked on, one by one, small, reliable suns. I turned off the desk lamp, closed the cabinet, and held the Willow Creek keys for a final beat, the metal cool against my skin. Then I walked outside, set the keys on the office steps for the buyer's agent to pick up, and watched the porch light catch them, bright and brief, before the dusk took them back.